4. I'm 81. My Amish wedding night ended with a locked door and a secret. The brass key turns on the other side of the door, and the small click goes straight through my ribs. I'm sitting on the edge of a walnut bed, with a quilt scratching the backs of my hands, while cold air slips under the frame and curls around my ankles. Daniel stands by the washstand, pulling the seam of his left sleeve. Again. Again. Outside, a horse stamps once in the frozen yard, and somewhere below us a man coughs like he's trying not to be heard. The lamp burns low. I can smell lye soap on my wrists, and burnt sugar from the wedding cake still caught in my hair. Ruth told me one thing before supper. Be a good wife. That was all. 5 words. No one told me why the door would be locked, who had the key, or what Daniel had promised the bishop before we climbed those narrow stairs. He looks at me and says, "Sarah, I don't know. I remember. No, wait." He says, "I don't know how. That's different. I've carried that difference my whole life." Then his eyes move toward the door. There's a folded paper beneath the keyhole, pushed halfway into the room, with one sentence written in Bishop Amos's square black hand. Daniel reaches for it, but I get there first. And when I read it, my toes curl inside my shoes. I'm 17 years old. That was 64 years ago. I'm 81 now. Quick pause. My name is Sarah, and this is Rebecca Amish Home. If these stories make you feel less alone, subscribe. It's free, and it keeps these voices alive. Tell me in the comments, what truth were you expected to learn alone? A super chat or membership tells me these voices are worth hearing. That keeps this going. Now, back to what happened. The sentence said, a wife must not refuse, and a husband must not leave until the marriage is complete. Beneath it, in smaller letters, Bishop Amos had added, knock once when it is done. I read it twice because the lamp flame kept jumping, and the black ink seemed to move with it. Daniel stood close enough that I could hear the dry catch in his throat. Nobody had ever explained what complete meant. Not to me, and later I learned not to him either. But in our church district, marriage wasn't treated like a private promise between 2 frightened young people. It belonged to the family, the ordnung, the ministers, the whole row of buggies outside. Nobody said that plainly. They didn't have to. I knew it from the way married women lowered their voices when a girl entered the room, and from the way men spoke about obedience as if it were a roof beam holding up the house. That's the thing nobody tells you. A rule can live inside you before anyone gives it words. The rule showed itself in small places. It was in Mama sliding a dish towel over a nursing booklet when I came into the kitchen with the yellow flour sack curtains. It was in Aunt Miriam saying, "Not for girls," when I asked why Lena cried behind the wash house 3 weeks after her wedding. It was in the silence at quilting bees whenever a husband's name came up, and a woman's needle stopped for half a breath. Once, when I was 14, I asked Ruth what happened after a wedding supper. She pressed her thumb against a blue chalk mark on the quilt and said, "You'll know when you need to." I almost asked how. I almost said that knowing after you need to know isn't knowing at all. But Bishop Amos's wife looked across the frame, and her mouth tightened just enough. So I swallowed it. That was how questions were answered. Not with words, but with someone else's shame held up like a warning lamp. By the time Daniel began walking me home from Sunday singing, I had already learned to call silence modesty. Ruth was my older sister by 6 years, and she had been married long enough to keep her eyes on her hands when she spoke. 3 nights before my wedding, she took me into the pantry where the shelves smelled of apples going soft and kerosene from the lantern tin. She gave me 5 words, be still and trust your husband. Then she folded a dishcloth into a square that was already square. I waited for more. There wasn't any. Mama gave me a new nightdress with tiny pearl buttons and told me not to wrinkle it before evening. Aunt Miriam said the first night was a wife's duty, then asked whether I had packed my black stockings. Daniel, I found out years later, had received 7 minutes with his father beside the harness rack. His father told him to pray, be firm, and not embarrass the family. That was our preparation. 12 words for me, perhaps 20 for him, and a locked room waiting at the end of it. I had trusted Daniel because he was gentle in ways that didn't make a show of themselves. When my little brother Eli split his thumb on a fence staple, Daniel wrapped it with the clean handkerchief he kept for church and walked him home through mud that ruined both boots. He once brought Mama a sack of flour without telling anyone our bin was nearly empty. And during singing, when the room got hot and my collar scratched my neck, he'd open the window beside him even in January, pretending he needed air. He was 23. No, 24. I always get that wrong because his birthday fell 9 days before the wedding. He had a crooked front tooth and a habit of counting fence posts under his breath. I loved him. I think I loved him. I don't know if that girl had enough words to tell love from safety, but she felt calm when he stood near her, and that mattered. That's why the fear in his face hurt more than the note. The days before the wedding were full of work and almost no truth. We baked 32 loaves in the summer kitchen, though it was February, because the big oven drew better there. The windows fogged white, and Ruth kept wiping one clear circle with her elbow so she could watch the lane. Women came with pies, jars of pickled beets, and advice that stopped just before it became useful. Don't make things harder. Remember your place. It gets easier. Lena, my cousin, tied bundles of spoons with green thread and whispered, "Sometimes you go somewhere else in your head." I asked what she meant. She pulled the thread so tight it snapped and said she meant during long sermons. We both knew she didn't. Nobody told me I could ask Daniel to stop. Nobody told him to wait for me to say yes. And when the last buggy left that night, Bishop Amos put the brass key into his vest pocket and led us upstairs. The room was smaller than I had imagined, with one walnut bed, one washstand, and a chair missing the cane in its middle. Lamplight made the wallpaper flowers look brown instead of blue, and frost feathered the bottom corners of the window. I wore the pearl-button nightdress under my wedding clothes because Mama had said there would be no proper place to change. The collar dug into my throat. Daniel's boots left 2 wet marks on the braided rug, one shaped like a broken heart, though I didn't notice that until much later. Outside, harness chains clinked as someone led a horse toward the barn, and the wind rubbed a branch against the siding with a soft, steady scrape. Daniel removed his hat, set it on the chair, then picked it up and set it on the washstand. His hands couldn't decide where anything belonged. Neither could we. The locked door sat behind us, quiet as another person. He asked whether I was cold. I said no, though my jaw was shaking hard enough to click. Then he asked if I had read the whole note, and I held it out without looking at him. His thumb covered the word refuse. He read the sentence once, then again, moving his lips with no sound. "My father said," he began. That was all. I waited. He rubbed both palms down the front of his trousers and stared at the floorboard where a black knot looked like an eye. "Sarah, we're supposed to—" He stopped there too. I wanted him to finish, and I wanted him never to finish. My hands were locked around the bed quilt, feeling each raised stitch bite into my fingers. He sat beside me, not touching, breathing too fast. "Are you afraid?" I asked. He nodded, just once, and for one strange second, I felt less alone because the boy beside me was trapped in that room too. Then he reached for my hand. I pulled back before I meant to, and his fingers closed on empty air. His face changed, not to anger but to panic, the look of a boy failing a lesson everyone else understood. "I won't hurt you," he said. I believed him. That's the hard part. He touched my sleeve, and every muscle in my back went stiff. "We have to knock," he whispered, glancing at the door. I said, "Maybe we can wait." A floorboard sounded in the hall. Someone was still outside. The shame of being heard felt bigger than my fear, because shame had been taught to me carefully, and fear had no name. What followed wasn't loud. I stared at the wallpaper seam and counted 11 tiny blue flowers, then 12, then 11 again. Daniel kept saying, "I'm sorry." I kept saying, "It's fine." My fingers went numb around the quilt, and my tongue pressed so hard against my mouth that I tasted iron. I wanted to pull away and move closer at once. We had no shared way to pause, only duty, a locked door, and a man waiting for one knock. Afterward, Daniel sat on the floor with his back against the bed and covered his face. The lamp had burned low enough to leave a black curl of soot on the chimney glass. I stayed where I was because standing seemed like a skill I had forgotten. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Then he asked, "Did I do wrong?" I looked at the brass keyhole and said, "No." I said it because the truth would have broken something we didn't know how to mend. My body ached, but the sharper feeling was confusion, a heavy blankness under my ribs. I noticed a loose red thread in the quilt and pulled it until a whole row of stitches puckered. Daniel reached up and stopped my hand gently. Then he crossed the room, lifted his fist, and knocked once. The key turned almost at once. That was when I understood someone had been listening the whole time. Neither of us understood that a body can obey while a person has not agreed. We didn't know fear could silence speech, or that silence wasn't permission, or that marriage didn't erase the need for care. The logic we had been given was simple. A husband led, a wife yielded, and private pain was proof that pride still needed breaking. Bishop Amos opened the door without looking at my face. He looked at Daniel, nodded once, and said, "Good, get some rest." I was 17, still wearing my wedding pins, and a church leader had waited in the hall to make sure 2 unprepared young people followed an order neither understood. Daniel wasn't trying to hurt me. That's what makes it worse. He had been taught that stopping would shame us both, and I had been taught that asking him to stop would make me the cause of that shame. Years later, outside the community, I learned one plain rule. If either person is frightened or unsure, you stop. I sat with that sentence at a clinic table while a paper cup of tea went cold between my hands. It would have changed the room, the note, the knock, perhaps even the first years of our marriage. But no one had kept that truth from only me. The silence had passed from mother to daughter, father to son, minister to couple, each person handing over an empty box and calling it wisdom. And I carried that. Daniel carried it too, though his looked different. We mistook silence for being safe. We left that room believing we had completed a marriage, when really, we had begun it with a wound neither of us knew how to name, much less how to heal. That wound became a pattern before either of us knew it had a shape. I learned to leave my body without leaving the room. I would count the knots in the ceiling boards, name every jar on the pantry shelf in my head, or plan the next morning's bread down to the last cup of flour. By the time our first child was born, I could make myself very still while my mind walked to the creek behind Papa's barn. Daniel learned his own rituals. He'd ask if I was tired, but only after the lamp was out. He'd turn his face toward the wall when he knew I had been crying. We became polite around the wound, almost tender. That's the thing nobody tells you. 2 kind people can build a whole life around one place they're afraid to touch. I got very good at disappearing. Turns out that was one skill our community taught without putting it on the school list. On washing days, the women gathered behind Ruth's house, where steam from the copper kettle wet our hairlines and made the ground smell like hot dirt. Lena worked beside me, wringing one of Jacob's white shirts until her knuckles went pale. "Do you ever go numb?" she asked. 5 words. I thought she meant her hands in the cold water, so I said yes and laughed too quickly. She didn't laugh. Ruth dropped a wooden clothespin and it landed upright in the mud like a tiny marker. For a moment, nobody moved. I could feel the confession coming toward us, thin and shaking, but Aunt Miriam stepped outside with a basket and said, "Idle talk grows weeds." Lena looked down. I looked down too. That was the exact moment I knew I wasn't alone. Not because anyone told me, because three women suddenly became very interested in the same patch of mud, while the kettle lid jumped and jumped as if it were trying to speak for us. Lena's story came in pieces. Jacob prayed aloud because he was afraid of doing wrong, and afterward he sometimes cried with his face turned toward the wall. She kept count of the worst nights with pencil marks behind a flower cupboard hinge, then scrubbed them away before his mother came to help with canning. Lena didn't hate him. She worried about him. We had so much pity for the men's fear that there was no room left for our own. When she asked the deacon's wife whether a wife could ask for time, the woman pressed a warm biscuit into her palm and said, "Prayer softens stubbornness." 4 months later, Lena stopped coming to washing day. I never learned where she went. Daniel and I stayed married 47 years, making a life from the pieces that didn't hurt: apple trees, burnt cornmeal, babies, burials, and nights when he split wood in the dark because he saw my shoulders tighten. I loved him. I feared him too. Both were true, and neither truth canceled the other when morning came. After Daniel died, I left the district to live near my daughter Anna, in a town where grocery carts squeaked and nobody knew my grandfather's name. I was 73 the first time a nurse handed me a cream-colored pamphlet with a blue circle on the front. I'm sitting in a clinic now under a vent that blows cold air onto my right shoulder, while a sunflower clock ticks above the sink. The pamphlet shows 2 stick figures and a line between them. Above the line is one word: consent. Beneath it, in plain print, is a sentence: a yes must be freely given, and it can be withdrawn. My thumb stops on withdrawn. My chest jerks once, like I've missed a stair. Then my hands begin to shake hard enough that the paper makes a dry, whispering sound against the metal table, loud enough that the nurse looks up from her chart. I read the sentence again: freely given, withdrawn, stop. Such small words. I wasn't angry, not then. I was just sad. Devastatingly sad, though that word still feels too large and too neat. I was sad for the girl on the walnut bed, who thought goodness meant staying still. I was sad for the young man on the floor who covered his face because he knew something had gone wrong but had no way to say what. I was sad for Lena with her pencil marks, for Ruth folding a square cloth into smaller squares, for Mama hiding a booklet beneath a towel. None of us had been born knowing silence. We were trained into it. That's the thing nobody tells you. A whole room can be full of love and still leave a child unprotected. And I carried that truth home in my handbag, beside 2 peppermints, a bus receipt, and the handkerchief Daniel gave me in 1951. At home, I tried to explain it to Anna while she peeled an orange over the sink. The peel came away in one bright curl. I told her about the note, the locked door, the knock. She put down the orange and said, "Mama, why didn't you leave?" I looked at her kitchen door with its small brass latch and realized she truly couldn't see it. To her, a door was wood and hinges. To me, that door had been God, family, marriage, shame, winter roads, and every face I trusted standing on the other side. I didn't blame her. How could she know? But that night I felt homeless in 2 places. The world I came from had no words for what happened, and the world I entered couldn't understand why words alone hadn't saved me. I lay awake listening to her refrigerator hum, and grieved not only what happened, but the gentle life that might have happened instead. And then give me a second. And still, there are gifts I won't pretend away. I miss horses at dawn, their breath making white clouds while harness buckles clicked in the blue cold. I miss bread from a wood oven, the crust singing when Mama set it on the table, and the swipe of flour she always left across her cheek. I miss my grandmother's hands when she prayed, thick knuckles folded beneath her chin, one thumbnail split from years of garden work. Those things made me. They taught me patience, care, and how to notice weather before it turns. I can still mend a cuff so the seam nearly disappears. I can feed 12 people from what looks like an empty pantry. And when rain hits a tin roof, some part of me is 8 years old again, safe under a blue quilt, while Ruth whispers a hymn in the dark. I won't surrender that child just because other parts of the house were unsafe. She deserves her rain and hymns. I am homesick for a place that hurt me. There, I said it. The harm was silence dressed as holiness. 5 words, and I wish they weren't true. But the beauty was true too, and beauty and harm can live in the same house, drink from the same dipper, kneel at the same bench. I don't need to burn every memory to tell the truth about one locked door. These days, I choose what gets carried forward. I keep the bread, the mending, and the way neighbors came before sunrise when a barn caught fire. I leave behind the rule that a girl's fear is less holy than a man's duty. Sometimes I picture Bishop Amos as an old man with tired eyes, believing he was guarding order. I can feel tenderness for his fear without calling his choice harmless. That's the life I'm building now. Not clean, not simple, but mine. A life where love no longer needs a key in someone else's pocket, and where a closed door can still open from within. If you grew up somewhere your own body was kept from you like something dangerous, I see you. If you were taught that obedience mattered more than the knot in your stomach, I see you. You may have survived by going quiet, becoming useful, or smiling before anyone could ask why your hands shook. That survival wasn't weakness. It was your body finding a door when the room had none. You survived something, and surviving is enough. You are not broken because it took years to find the right word. You are not foolish because you loved people who passed the silence down to you. And you don't have to hate every good memory before you're allowed to name the harm. Both truths can sit beside each other. They may never become comfortable. They can still be true. Your life doesn't have to become simple before it can become your own. One small choice at a time. To the one who's still inside, hiding questions beneath folded clothes, I see you. To the one who left and misses supper at dusk, I see you. To the one standing at the edge, wondering whether doubt makes you bad, it doesn't. To the one lying beside a spouse, and only now realizing why your body goes far away, you aren't alone. To the one who recognized herself when Lena counted marks behind a hinge, breathe. To the daughter who can't understand why her mother didn't open the door, ask gently. To the husband who was taught that certainty was kindness, you can learn another way. Wherever you are in this, I see you. And you are not alone. You don't need the whole map tonight. One honest word can be a first step, and one first step is still movement toward yourself. Leave me a comment. Tell me what you felt listening to this, or the moment that made something in your own life click into place. There is so much more I haven't said yet. I'm just getting started. There are stories I haven't been brave enough to tell, but I'm getting closer. Stay with Rebecca Amish home if you believe quiet lives deserve honest words, and subscribe so these stories don't disappear behind closed doors again. And to the members and Super Chat family, you're the reason the next story gets told. If you want to be part of that, the door is always open. I'm 81 now, and some nights I still hear that brass key turn. But when the memory comes, I picture my own hand on the latch. I picture the girl I was standing beside me, not behind me. And this time, nobody waits in the hall. This time, the room belongs to her. The light belongs to her. The choice belongs to her. Your body was always yours, even before you knew. You get to choose now.